Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today, we're looking at Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern, which translates to How beautifully shines the morning star. This is a pretty straightforward chorale. It's also a relatively short chorale in comparison to yesterday's episode. If you haven't checked out yesterday's episode, you should definitely give it a watch if you have about 45 minutes of free time, because it's a really fascinating chorale. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. This is a very straightforward chorale. So one flat in the key signature, we start on F, we end on F. I'm going to hedge my bets and say we are in the key of F major. First complete measure, we start with E, G, E, and C. E, G, C, and C. That's C major over E, which is 5-6. One going to 5-6 is probably the most common progression we see in the chorales, at least as an introductory progression. And then we have a passing seventh in the melody before we get F, F, C, and A, which is another tonic triad. We have some more passing tones in the lower voices in the melody. They spell out E, G, C, and G, which is like a passing C major over E, which is 5-6. And then we get D, A, D, and F with a couple of passing tones in the inner voices. That spells out D minor in root position, which is our 6th chord. Okay, then we have A, C, F, and C. That's F major over A, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. We then have B flat, C, F, and D. This is kind of an interesting chord because I know that this C is functioning like a 9/8 suspension over the bass, which would make this a B flat major chord or a 4 chord, but C gets introduced in the bass when the resolution occurs. Whether or not you look at the resolution happening on this beat or whether it happens with this set of 16th notes, that's entirely up to you to decide, but I think that a 4 chord is what's being implied here. This A is a neighbor tone as well, so we can mark that before we get D, B flat, F, and D, which is another B flat major chord, this time in first inversion. And then we get our cadence. So interestingly, we have E here and B flat with F and D. So this B flat's a chord tone. This really the only thing here is this E natural, and we have another interesting situation here where we have a chord that doesn't quite add up, and that would be an argument for this being a plagal cadence, because the first chord we have before, or the penultimate chord we have before a final cadential harmony, is a 4 chord. However, this E flat, B, and D kind of feels like a E flat diminished chord, and it sort of makes me feel like there might be a G somewhere, but there isn't. This is just the way that it's spelled, because I'm of the mindedness that this feels more like an imperfect authentic cadence, because this sounds like a 7 chord that's happening in root position E diminished, just with this F right here. So whether or not that E diminished chord is completely valid, or I guess more specifically it'd be E minor 7 flat 5 in root position, that's for you to decide. But I think plagal cadence, imperfect authentic cadence, it's a relatively weak imperfect authentic cadence if it is one, and it's a modified plagal cadence if it's one. So I think it rides the line depending on where you draw the line between a chord partaking in the cadence and how many notes need to be a part of the chord. But then we cadence on F major, of course, F, A, F, and C, which is our tonic. Okay, looking ahead, we have C major, E, C, G, and C. It's in first inversion, 5-6, and I think this is where we modulate to the key of C major. This is our tonic triad in first inversion as well. You could say that the F chord is where we modulate. It just feels like the C major chord. We don't really have any reason to think that we're modulating yet until we see the chords that are happening after the fact, in my opinion. So we do have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C here, which is what's leading me to think that there's some type of modulation that's happening before the B naturals. But then we get F, C, A, and D, which is D minor 7 over F, another sort of mid-phrase 2-6-5 chord. These have been kind of common in the last couple of chorales we've looked at. And then we get G, B, G, and not D, which is what we would expect after a 2-6-5 chord, but G, B, G, and E, which is E minor in first inversion. That is a 3-6 chord. And we're getting a series of adjacent harmonies here, 1, 2, 3. Maybe that will continue. It actually does, A, C, F, and F, which is F major over A. That's a 4-6 chord. And then we have some passing tones going on here and in anticipation, B, D, G, and F, which is another adjacent harmony. That's G7 over B, 5, 6, 5. And then we get our resolution. So we literally harmonize the major scale in first inversion chords, some of them seventh, some of them not, until we get to our 5 chord, which then resolves where we would expect it to, C, E, G, and E, which is our tonic triad in root position. This E and this G here kind of take the chord and put it in first inversion, but we get rid of the root of the chord in doing so, so maybe there's a 3 chord happening here. I don't really think it contributes too much to the chord progression, so I'm just going to leave it. We then have F, A, F, and D. That's D minor in first inversion, or 2-6. This D is a chord tone, this D is a chord tone. It's kind of taking the chord and putting it in root position, but we're taking a complete triad and then undoing its completeness. So I don't really feel like it's contributing too much to the chord progression by analyzing that, but we could talk about it though. And then we get G7 in root position, G, B, F, and D. It's our dominant 7. And then we cadence on C major, C, C, E, and C, our tonic triad. And looking ahead, we have an interesting cadence here in the key of F major. It's a perfect authentic cadence, but our cadential chord does not have a third. It's just a big open fifth. It's very interesting. But yeah, the C major chord I think is also functioning like our dominant in the key of F major, because we get F immediately afterwards, F, C, F, and A, which is now our new tonic because we're in F again. We then have B flat, F, and D, which is B flat major in root position. That's a 4 chord, passing 7th in the tenor before we get C, G, E, and C, which is C major in root position. That is our 5 chord. We then have D, D, F, and B flat. We have sort of this idea of prolonging the resolution by adding another 4 chord here. It's B flat major over D. And then we have some passing tones we have a passing tone in anticipation and a neighbor tone. We're really running the gamut here with all of the non-chord tones we have. E, C, G, and B flat. That's a passing C7 chord over E, which is 5, 6, 5. And then we cadence on F major, F, C, F, and A. Or we don't cadence on F major, but feels like the end of somewhat of a cadential progression. 4, 5, 1 is a pretty hallmark cadential progression. So F going down to B flat. This B flat is a non-chord tone, but I feel like it's functioning more as just something that's leading into the C major chord, which is our penultimate chord in our cadence here. C, C, F, and G. That's C major in root position with a 4-3 suspension over the bass. Our resolution happens on the next beat before we get F major, F, C, F, and F, without a third. Very interesting. Okay, looking ahead, we have a very long phrase here. I guess you can make an argument that there are a series of single bar phrases that are happening consecutively with one another, because it's just a lot of 5-1, 5-1 in the key of F major, but there are no fermato markings. I'm just going to leave it as is, and if we look all the way ahead here to our next phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of F. So we start off the phrase with C, C, F, and G, similar to how we ended our last phrase. This is a C major chord with a 4-3 suspension over the bass, and then we go to F, F, C, F, and F, another open fifth, so it's kind of reiterating the exact same phrase that we had. In fact, it's the exact same spelling in both chords. And here we get a change of spellings, but still a similar progression, E, C, G, and C. That's C major over E, which is 5, 6, and then we get a fully voiced F major chord, F, C, A, and A, which is our tonic triad in root position. And again, we get another 5-1 progression here, C, C, G, and C. This time the 5 chord does not have a third, and then we get F major, F, C, F, and A, which is our tonic triad. And then we get a very long phrase here that just consists of a lot of 1 and 5 chords oscillating between the two of them. F, C, F, and A is F major again, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass, A, C, F, and A. That's F major in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass. We also have a passing tone in the bass again before we get C, C, E, and G. That is C major in root position, which is a 5 chord. We have a passing tone in the alto and a passing tone in the bass before we get E, C, C, and G. It's taking the C major chord and putting it in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass. And then the chord kind of gets turned into a 7 chord here with the passing 7th, as well as the E turning into a C in the bass, which is kind of like root position. And with all of these third list chords, maybe there's an argument to be made here that there is a root position 5-7 chord, but I don't see that it's super impactful in terms of changing the progression. Here we have F, A, C, and A. Again, another F major triad and for root position. Passing tones in the lower voices before we get A, C, C, and A, which changes the one chord actually. I mean, you could make the argument that this is a rootless 1-6 chord, but I guess literally speaking, this is an A minor triad, A, C, C, and A without a third, so 3 technically speaking. Passing tones in the alto and bass before we get C, C, E, and G. That is our 5 chord again, C major, with a passing 7th in the bass, and then we get A, C, E, and G. I think it's more likely that instead of this being a 3-7 chord like A minor 7, this is rather G, C, E, and G, which would be a passing 5-6-4 chord where we can just change the figure bass, no need to reiterate the Roman numeral, before we get F, C, F, and A. I think 5 going to 1 is a much more likely progression than 3 going to 1, even though we do see 3 going to 1 with, actually not really with any regularity, but we do see it from time to time. Nothing like how we see 5 going to 1 though. Okay, then we have a passing 7th in the bass before we get D, D, F, and A. That's D minor in root position, which is our 6th chord. Passing 7th in the bass again before we get B flat, D, F, and G. That's G minor 7 over B flat, which is 2, 6, 5. 6 going to 2 is a normative progression via the cycle of falling fifths. This G right here is a chord tone, and it kind of is like putting the chord in root position, but it undoes the third there, leaving us with an incomplete 7 chord without the third, which is an important contextual tone in minor chords, so we're not going to analyze it as being in root position here. We then have C, C, E, and G, which is our 5 chord, what we would expect after a 2-6 chord or a 2-6-5 chord, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we cadence on F major, F, A, F, and F, our tonic triad. Okay, looking ahead, we have another perfect authentic cadence in the key of F major, no modulations here. We have F, D, A, and F, which is D minor in first inversion, that's 6-6. This F is a chord tone, this C is a passing 7th before we get G, B flat, G, and E. That's E diminished over G, which is 7-6, some more adjacent harmony here. Passing tone in the bass before we get B flat, F, and D. A bit of a transitive progression here, that's B flat major in root position. We would expect 4 to go to 7, but transitively we're seeing 7 go to 4, and that's totally fine because the same voice leading takes us in either direction, and Bach does that regularly. We have a passing 7th in the tenor before we get C, G, E, and C. That's C major in root position, which is our 5 chord, and then we get another progression that we saw earlier, 4 going to 5, going to 4, 6, D, F, D, and B flat. Which is, like I said, 4-6, and then we have some passing tones going on here in the lower voices. We have E, G, D, and B flat, a slight variation on the previous progression. This is E half diminished in root position, E minor 7 flat 5, which is 7-7, and then we get F, A, C, and A, which is our tonic triad in root position. So 4-7-1, very similar to the chord progression we have here at the end of the A section. And then we have A, A, C, and A, and similar to kind of what's happening, actually similar to what's happening, we saw it earlier, but the point I'm trying to make is that A, C, C, and A, I don't think there is a 3 chord happening off of this beat. I don't think that impacts the chord progression too much by labeling it a 3 chord, especially because it's just ending up to go to 2 anyways, and 3 going to 2 is a relatively uncommon progression. I can't think of it happening really with any regularity in the chorales. But we have B flat, D, and G, which is G minor over B flat, that's 2-6. And then this G is a chord tone. I've talked at length, actually, hold on. we have two B flats here, so I can say that the chord is kind of like being put in root position here. It's very brief, but regardless, we're left with a root position triad afterwards. That's relatively uncommon. Most of the time we see this undo the completeness of the triad by adding it, but in this case the third is doubled, so we can, or Bach replaces one of the thirds with a root and we're left with a complete triad in root position. That's fine. This A is a passing tone, so we don't need to, it's a non-chord tone. Sorry, that's what I was trying to say. We have C, G, C, and G, another open fifth, which is very interesting, but still implying C major. And then we cadence on F, F, A, C, and F, which is our tonic triad in root position, and that concludes today's analysis. Lots of ones, lots of fives, a relatively straightforward progression that only modulates twice, once to the dominant and once to another key, or once to the original tonic key, and we stay in F for the rest of the chorale. Very straightforward, relatively plain, but still interesting. We see this motive in the chorale sometimes where he just takes the harmonic rhythm and effectively halves it by turning the progression into a chord followed by an inversion, followed by a new chord, followed by an inversion. So less of a real progression happening here and more of just a slowed down series of chords following one another, as opposed to the regular harmonic rhythm that Bach established earlier on in the chorale, which was pretty much one chord per beat with the occasional passing chord. But that's pretty much today's analysis. I'm going to cap the video off there. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of the chorale harmonizations, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification icon. You'll be notified of when my daily upload goes live, and there are hundreds of more chorales to analyze, so I would love to have you along on the journey. On that note, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. It really means a lot to me, and I hope you take care.